Welcome back to A More Perfect Union, the Hill's three-day virtual festival on politics and policy. Our last session today will highlight leadership in action, featuring some of our nation's most important thought-provoking leaders. Before we get underway, a reminder you can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag #TheHillAMPU. AMPU is for A More Perfect Union. We're broadcasting live and we'll take your questions throughout the program. If you experience trouble with the live stream, don't throw your computer through the window, just push refresh, and I hope it will all be well. To kick off the hour, I'm pleased to introduce my first guest, a man who really needs no introduction right now. He is the chair of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee and one of the most high-profile, moderate, centrist Democrats on Capitol Hill today. I'm pleased to welcome Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Senator Manchin, everybody's watching.
Steve?
I'm doing great. You know, everybody, is used to media covering the most flamboyant extremists and chasing that. You've become the most flamboyant centrist in the kind of great debates of the day. And I mean that as a compliment. But I'm interested to know where you think things stand right now, in terms of the battles over, really it's not even Republican versus Democrat anymore. We have a Democrat versus Democrat tension. And as we think about a more perfect union, that's our goal today. Where do you think we're going? How is this going to get reconciled?
Well, to start off with, I think everyone knows that I asked for a strategic pause. And I did that truly after a long deliberation and seeing where we were about a month or so ago and seeing the COVID coming back, the variant, seeing basically inflation coming on pretty strong back then, and it's even got stronger since. And also the fallout that I knew, geopolitical fallout from the Afghanistan exit. So I said, with all the unknown, don't you think we ought to hit the pause? And my reason for that was that under the ARP, which we just did in January, 1.9 trillion with a T, Steve, that I thought, well, we had most of all these areas covered. These areas were covered up through 2022. We didn't have that urgency to do that right now. So I said, let's make sure we can address the unknown if it comes. And that way I said, so let's wait. Well, that ship has sailed. Nobody wanted to. I was very much the minority. And when you said about being in the center, I want you to know it's not real crowded here. I don't have a lot of competition. And the bottom line is we're just trying to do something that we can that helps people, the quality of life they have and the quality of life they could have in a much better way, but also not putting a burden on everybody else and making sure the jobs that we have, the opportunities that we have, the skill sets are ready to meet the 21st century. We're looking at everything. And so we're talking through this and we're trying to put a framework, which I think we'll get a framework. But, the devil's in the details. You got to see the text.
Right. And
so we're working on that.
From your perspective, you just spent Sunday morning with President Biden at his home in Delaware. You recently met Representative Jayapal, who's one of the leaders in the House, and some of the progressive agenda items in their bill. And you've also spent a few hours with Senator Bernie Sanders. So, you're someone that many people know believes in getting together, communicating, talking, figuring out. So how much gap is between all of you now, and have these meetings where you're spending human time with people helped at all in the process?
It helps tremendously. Anytime you know your colleagues, you're always, and the more you know them, the more you have in common maybe that you didn't think you had, the more that you want to work and cooperate together if you can. Getting a chance to spend a few hours with Pramila, Congresswoman Jayapal, getting a chance to spend some hours with Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders. It's helped tremendously. I think hopefully they understand me better. I tell people, I says, I'm a compassionate capitalist. And other people might not consider themselves capitalists. With that, then we have to realize we have some differences. I don't want anything to happen right now because I think that we do need a pause. I'm in a minority there. I could just say, no, I'm not going to do anything. I don't even want to talk or negotiate. But I've been trying to look at and see everyone's position. So I have said this. If I was dealing and the shoe was on the other foot, I'd be happy if someone would talk to me who had the ability to either work with me and help me get something done or decide you get nothing done.
Right.
And I've tried to put myself in the most positive position to help where I think I can and still go home and explain it. That's the big thing, Steve. if I can't go home and explain, I can't vote for it.
Yeah, look,
I'm very careful.
You and I have talked about this. I've also talked to the other side, and I think one of the real questions they said, look, over the last many decades, we've seen inequality grow worse in this country. We've seen the wealthier get wealthier, the wealthiest get wealthier. We've seen folks feel like they've been left behind and not have the same opportunities. We've seen, student debt just amass at huge levels, and folks aren't going to be able to work that off. And there's this concern about childcare and just sort of helping those people that are on the lesser end of that equation in the country. And so I guess the question that people have in trying to address that, what do you do to kind of begin diminishing that divide in the country so that we do have not two Americas living in the same disunion, but people committed to a union and a great country, but feel like they're not being screwed by the system?
Well, first of all, the president and I were speaking, and he said, Joe, what do you think? And I said, and he's a very good listener, and he'll always ask you for your input. And I said, Mr. President, the way I evaluate this and see everything is that there's only one thing that I know all of us Democrats that have a D by our name, whether you're moderate, centrist, conservative, or liberal, we all agreed that the 2017 tax cuts were weighted in the wrong direction and very unfair for the average American and working people in West Virginia. So we voted against it, all Democrats. Don't you think you should start with trying to have a fair and balanced tax system in our country? Make sure the IRS is able to do the job it was intended to do, go after people that just evade their taxes, won't pay their taxes, or scam the system. Those are the things we start agreeing and should agree on. But this thing has grown to a complete, if you will, a total social reform. And I've always said this, you've got to get your fiscal house in order to do any of the other things you like to do. You can't dig the hole deeper. So I'm all for that. And you said pre-K, 3 and 4-year-olds. I believe that that's the best investment we can make. Give them structure, give them nutrition, give them some direction. And that's the most developable time that they're going to have, I think, if they're going to be successful adults. And then childcare. Childcare's all around working. I'm all for helping working families, working individuals, single moms, single dads that would have a chance to make sure their child is taken care of in the safety and the loving care of a good child care system. And we're expanding that to faith-based churches. We can't start a whole nother government system, but we have churches all over that could just jump in and do a terrific job in child care. And so we're looking at every way we can to do that. End of life, Steve. I think that every elderly person that needs assistance and want to live with the dignity and respect that they've always had in their life have a chance to stay at home with some assistance. I'm for that. I'm for a lot of these things, but expanding all the social programs for the sake of expanding them when you can't even maintain what you have or pay for what you have, Steve, is a real challenge. And I've said Medicare 2026 insolvent. I know when these trust funds go insolvent, people start getting cut back, or they have to pay more into it, or their premiums would cost, or basically they go to the doctor and a doctor says, I'm not going to take Medicaid anymore or Medicare anymore because reimbursements are so low from the federal government. Those are the things we don't want to happen. In my state, Social Security and Medicare is the lifeline. And I'm going to make sure those are solid and solvent.
Senator, we're right just a few days away from the UN climate change conference starting in Glasgow. The United States has taken this. You've met with Secretary Kerry and Envoy Kerry going there. I'm interested in where you're at because you're well known to be worried about the coal miners in West Virginia. How are they going to eventually fit into climate-friendly policies? And as we lead into Glasgow, where are you with the president's plan?
Sure. Well, first of all, the president's going to be able to take into Glasgow that the United States of America is the only one that's made an effort to reduce the fossil use in our country. When you look 10 years down the road, 10 years ago, China had about 1,700 coal-fired plants. They're up to 2,991, and they're building another 460. 10 years ago, India had like 550, and now they're up to 800 or 900, building another 100. 10 years ago, the United States of America had 585 coal-fired plants. We're down to 504. We're the only nation that he's going to go speak to that has reduced its fossil consumption. 20 years ago, Steve, 52% of electricity in America came from coal-fired production of units that basically made electricity. Now we're down to 19%. So yes, we've done a lot. We've removed enough carbon, we've removed more particulates and more mercury than any other country. And that's what he can say. No one's talk about that. They want to just start eliminating. And I said, you cannot eliminate your way to a clean environment. You can innovate your way, but not eliminate it. So technology is where we're going. And just saying that you're going to pay, they're saying about, well, Joe Manchin's against the president's climate plan. I am not. I'm against what I know doesn't make sense, is to pay the utilities $150 billion with a B, $150 billion, to basically go ahead and eliminate all their fossil by 2030. The only thing I've been told by every utility company, we'll take your money and we'll try to hold the rates down for that 8 years. But after that, we can't guarantee you reliability, and the prices will go sky high. And that's reliability. And I'm not going to put our country, when I know a little bit about this industry, everyone thinks because I come from West Virginia, I'm just protecting my turf, if you will. And that's not the case. I'm protecting the viability and reliability of the energy grid and what we need to run the most superpower of the world, and continue to do that. And that's having energy independence. And there are people that are determined for us not to have energy independence, and we just have a difference there.
Let me ask you real quickly, finally, Senator, you were known, you spoke about working with, on the phone with Stacey Abrams. You put together a voting rights bill plan. You called it John Lewis Plus. A lot of folks saying, why, when you two crafted something along those lines, you had President Obama applauding what you did, wouldn't you, in order to save the sanctity of voting, to save democracy, not find a way to get a cutout on the filibuster to support a Voting Rights Act?
Steve, in order to save democracy, we better keep the filibuster, because there's only one thing that basically requires us to work together. And right now we're so tribal in Congress that it's unbelievable. You know, it's what tribe do you belong to? And if you're on a D tribe or the R tribe, you're supposed to be against the other tribe. And it's not who I am. It's not how you get things done. So I think that everyone should work hard, sit down with all of our Republican friends and our Democrats to try to find something we can agree on. It doesn't make sense to me that in 2006, the Voting Rights Act was basically voted on and reaffirmed unanimously, all Democrats and Republicans. And now you're saying we're so far apart, we can't even agree on how we can protect the sanctity of voting, the bedrock of democracy. Is anyone really trying? They might talk about it and they just say, oh no, I know they're not for it. They're all going to be against it. The easy thing to do, Steve, is to get rid of the filibuster and do what you want. Guess what? We Democrats used it tremendously to our advantage against Donald Trump. Okay, but all of a sudden now, we don't need it because it's not benefiting us. Well, wait a minute. If our Republican colleagues didn't get rid of it when Donald Trump beat on them every day, you can do this. Then I don't know. I was against it when Harry Reid did it in 2013. I was against it when Mitch McConnell did it in 2017, and I'm against getting rid of it now.
Is Joe Biden still on your Christmas card list?
Well, he'll always be on my Christmas card list. What you're asking, am I on his?
Yes.
I hope so.
Well, Senator Joe Manchin, chairman of the Senate Energy Committee, and right now in the eye of a bunch of different political storms all hitting at the same time, thank you so much for headlining this portion of our forum and helping us think through what a more perfect union looks like. Thank you so much, Senator.
A more perfect union, Steve, takes an awful lot of work. And but God bless America, because we're still the greatest country on earth. And it's not called the United States for nothing. And it's definitely not called a divided state. So we better start worrying about our country and quit allowing our politics to divide us.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Good to be with you.
Michael Moore is an Oscar-winning American filmmaker, author, and political activist. He's best known for his documentaries, Bowling for Columbine, Fahrenheit 9/11, and the more recent Fahrenheit 11/9. He's also a podcaster now, and he hosts Rumble with Michael Moore. Michael, it's a real pleasure to be with you again. It's been a lot of years since we talked, but I know you're a great friend to Rising and The Hill. Thank you for joining us. So, I would love to kind of, you have one of the most, I don't know how to put it, you've got a mind that looks at things and you don't follow the grooves that other folks do. And I'm trying to, you were applauding on one hand the departure from Afghanistan we had. You've been critical on other fronts, particularly on the inequality that we're leaving in America today. And I'm just interested, to kind of look at your dashboard of what you think Americans listening to this right now should understand and think through more carefully than they might as we follow network TV this way and that. Tell us how you're looking at this moment.
Well, thanks for that question, and thanks for having me, Steve. And thanks for having me right on after Senator Manchin. If I could just, if he's still listening or watching, West Virginia, if you've ever been there, it's a great state. The people are great. I remember when John F. Kennedy was running for president in the primaries in this 1960. And the key turning point, and I'm just in first grade at this point, but my parents always had us kids watching politics, and was when John F. Kennedy won West Virginia. West Virginia is not the stereotypical place I think a lot of people make it out to be. Senator Manchin, you have such a great state and so many people that are in need, that are suffering, whether it's the opioid crisis, whether it's jobs, whether it's the economy, COVID. What I would do is, and if anybody from the White House is watching this, ask Senator Manchin what would he like for the state of West Virginia, for the people of West Virginia, and then give it to him. I think, I haven't checked in with the millions of Democrats, liberals, progressives around the country, but I think they would support, just so we can move forward and get these bills passed. What is it, Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, what do you need in your states? We will give it to you. We support giving you what the politics of old, Steve, that's the way it worked. President Johnson, other presidents would bring in the person that they needed to convince, and then they'd say, let's do a little horse trading here. This is politics. What does your state need? We will make it happen for you. If that's all it could take to get this to where we need to be. Senator Manchin, you say you're a compassionate capitalist. I don't know. I'm not so sure if those words match up with each other. They're kind of a contradiction. But I understand where you're coming from. And you have voted along in the early months and even in last year with the former guy. You were voting the right way for the people. You've done that. You and I are not the same politically, but that's okay. We just want to all do what's right, and I especially want to do what's right for West Virginia. So when you don't have to be defensive about saying, hey, I'm just worried about my state. I'm glad you're worried about your state. That's one of the states that are most in need. So if he stuck around to hear any of that, yeah. I hope that he will do the right thing and go ahead and get what you need for the people of West Virginia.
Well, Michael, I'll make sure that that he and his team do see this segment. It's very powerful, and I'll just share with you. This is a little off script, and I imagine to go, but McDowell County, West Virginia, is one of the poorest counties in the United States of America, and it's in West Virginia. And I'm going to have Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, on I think on Thursday. And she committed quite a long time ago with Senator Manchin and Senator Shelley Moore Capito, and they had Lamar Alexander, Republican and Democrat, saying, hey, what can we do to the young person in the school system in McDowell County, West Virginia, to change the vector of opportunity for that student, whether it's teachers, wraparound services, changing schools. And it's been interesting. So I've just sort of watched this. And so I would tell you, not speaking for the senator in any way, that I know one of the things that he has said, because I've asked him the same question you have, is what they object to are just handouts or people saying give transfer payments to people. People care about work. They want to have work and opportunity. And I think part of it is the broad question of, as we talk in this forum about technology and retraining people and whatever, well, McDowell County, West Virginia was a platform for this labor union to try and say what they could do to change it. I think West Virginia, in a way, may be that as well. What can we do not to give just charity, but essentially create a vital new option?
except his last lines were Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid are
Right.
the lifeline for people in West Virginia.
Absolutely.
That is a handout
Yeah.
from the government.
Yeah.
And whether you paid into it or not paid into it through most of your life, the fact is, and worrying about saying that we're going to run out of money with Medicare. Well, yes, if we don't start taxing wealthy people for it. I don't know if most people watching this understand that when it comes to Social Security, that 7% that comes out of your paycheck and is matched by your employer, I don't know exactly where the cutoff is now. Maybe one of your people can correct me on this, but essentially, if you make over $110,000, $120,000 a year, you pay 0% in Social Security tax on anything over that 120,000. So, in other words, everybody who makes less than 120,000, they are taxed. It's a flat tax of 7%. In other words, their entire income is taxed. If I make more than 120,000, if I make 200,000 or 300,000, that other 200,000 is never taxed. I'm just
Right.
taxed the way that people that have very little money. That's wrong. If
Right.
we taxed everybody that 7%, whether you make 50,000 a year or whether you make 5 million a year, we would have enough money in Social Security and Medicare. I forgot what the number was. It goes well into the, I think, 2080s or 2090s. We're just not taxing the people that can afford to pay the tax.
Right.
And in this case, just tax the rich what you're taxing the poor. That's all. Whereas the rich get away with paying 0% after that, whatever it is, 220,000, 230, I don't know, it's somewhere in there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, whatever you pay over 120, 130,000 a year,
Right.
you pay 0%. I don't think most Americans understand that this is one of the big perks that wealthy people get, that they don't have to pay the same exact tax that middle class and working people have to pay.
Michael, let me ask you a question. You have said something very interesting to me, and I'm always fascinated by government because, governments don't often make strategic leaps. They really run the budgets mainly by inertia. Add a little bit more to what you did last year, add a little bit more the next year what you did. And so we see a defense budget which is very, very significant. A lot of people have said that, in fact, I know defense people that are surprised that President Biden didn't bring
Right.
it down. You've been saying, in a way, defund DOD and fund climate change remediation and climate change related policies. And I'm wondering if you're getting any resonance out there with that, because there's a lot of folks that have been saying the existential crisis of the day is much more on climate systemically, and we're not making that big strategic investment in a national security way. What are your thoughts?
Right, because if we're talking about the defense of this country, what could be more important than the fact that our planet is on the precipice right now? I mean, we're talking about saving American lives, the lives that are going to be lost because, well, you see it every day now with the weather but everything else. What I would say is this: if you know anybody, and by the way, being from Flint, Michigan, I have so much empathy and compassion for Joe Manchin and the people of West Virginia. That's why I'm saying, let's give them whatever they need. But if we don't, if you know anybody in the military and you ask them, do you think we could get by with a little less giving to the military? I mean, so many guys and women I know that have served and are serving right now can give you a laundry list of what they see with their own eyes in terms of, man, this is such a waste, or I can't believe the dollars going into this. We need to cut back on that. I'm not saying defund the Pentagon. I mean, obviously you need a national defense, but a real defense. That money for defense, real defense, needs to go to things like what we've done to our planet Earth, what we can do to prevent the calamity that we're in the middle of right now. All of that has to change, and I think that's a very easy thing. I don't think people who are pro-military would disagree with this. They see the waste. They know that what's going on with the floods in their towns and their villages, all the things that are happening, the fires out west, all of this stuff. I think most Americans now, I forgot what the latest poll was, but over 70% believe that climate and the climate catastrophe is real. We don't have to really convince. I don't know why
Yeah.
we still have to convince Republicans in Congress when their own
Yeah.
constituents already believe that.
Right.
But yes, absolutely. Big changes need to occur in how we spend the money, how we have to shift this money around. And
Yeah.
the same goes with mass incarceration, with law enforcement.
Right.
We really need to look at this in a 21st
Right.
century way. And that's how we're going to fix things. If we keep thinking the old thinking, we're not going to pull ourselves out of these messes that we're in.
I want to squeeze in one more, Michael. I've
Yes.
got
Yes.
labor organizing legend Dolores Huerta on the
Oh, yeah.
line,
Oh,
waiting to
stop
come
with
on. Oh
me
my
right
God,
now and
she's
just
just
go to
she's just
Dolores.
incredible. But I got to say, look, I mean, this is a serious question, because I love your blog and I love your exchange in these things, and I mean your podcast, and I think it's
And my
something
Substack, yeah.
for a longer conversation I'd love to have with you. In 2016, I interviewed then Vice President Joe Biden in an on-the-record interview, and I said, how do you think things look politically? Because, Donald Trump was, going to be running against Hillary Clinton. He said, Steve, the Democratic Party has some real problems. The Democratic Party is a party of snobs. And it was on the record comment. And so I was talking to someone in the White House who works with the president the other day. I said, how's the de-snobbing going? And he says, we still have real problems. I'd just be interested in your kind of frame on that, short form. But I do think that sometimes, when we get in these debates, that there's that element. That's part of the tension with the times we have of how you reach people who are where they are versus, those that are on a, different track of access and power.
Wow, that's a great question. I'll be very short. The Democratic Party, this should be such a great hope for us right now. As you know, I was out campaigning and supporting Bernie. But like Bernie, we are so amazed and impressed, progressive people, with what Joe Biden has done in these first 9 months or so, and how he seems to truly be a man of conscience and of putting everything through a moral filter of what is right and wrong for the American people and for this planet that we live on. So for next year, though, if Democrats don't deliver, a lot of people came out to vote for the first time last year. People had never voted. That's why we had a record turnout. They will not come back out. People that voted for Biden and the Democrats will not come back out next year and vote for them if they have not delivered. If they can't make this happen, if they can't give some assistance and some relief to the single parents, to the people who are still making $7.25 an hour, to the people who are still suffering from COVID and long haul COVID, and God knows what variant is on its way to us. If the Democrats don't deliver, there will be a depressed vote next year. And yes, people will come out and vote, but they're not going to bring 5 or 10 people with them to the polls. And that will be the doom for the Democratic Party in the 2022 and maybe the 2024 election. So I encourage them to quit calling it centrist or moderate or progressive or whatever. Do what's right for the people. And I'm talking about the working people, or in some cases, the non-working people of this country, that they need to see that they've got an advocate and a fighter for them. So far, that's how Joe Biden has acted. What happens in these next 2 weeks, it's critical. It's critical that the Democrats, if they want to prove that they're not snobs, that they are not part of the elites, there are many millionaire Democrats in Congress, as there are many, many Republican millionaires. The way that they can show this difference is to give the American people some help. Child tax credit, child care, elder care, all of these things. I mean, how can you not win on a platform that says old people should be able to see, to hear, and to chew their food? Tell me how.
I agree.
How is that such a radical socialist idea? This is like, we have to be able to do these basic things, and if we can't do that, we're in deep trouble. So my encouragement to Democrats is do not wait another day on this. Because the majority of Americans, they have voted for the Democrat for president in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections. The Republicans have only won one by popular vote, one presidential election since George I, George H.W. Bush. Only once did they win with the popular vote. That means the American people are on our side.
Well,
let's stand up for them and prove it.
Thank you so much, Michael. Michael Moore, Oscar-winning filmmaker. And listen, subscribe to his podcast, Rumble with Michael Moore. I am his latest subscriber. I'm really grateful, Michael. This has been terrific. We're going to have Dolores Huerta. We're going to continue this conversation on with her. But thank you for helping. I told everybody when you watch this today.
Thanks for the good work you do, and thanks for the good work that The Hill does. You're an important piece of journalism here in this country.
Absolutely, Michael. Thank you. My next guest has for decades, let's just say, she is a living legend. She has been for decades one of the most influential labor and civil rights activists in the United States. She's showing no signs of slowing down. Welcome, Dolores Huerta, president and founder of the Dolores Huerta Foundation, a not-for-profit committed to social justice foundation. Dolores, you and I have chatted before. I think you are my favorite interview. We've interviewed you 3 times, and I'm so happy you came back, because this forum is important as we think about what are the ingredients of a more perfect union. I used to watch my mom make, Betty Crocker cake. They weren't from scratch, but she still put stuff in it. That's what I have. If we're going to get the right, mixings for a better country in the future. And I know that your work with Cesar Chavez, your work with others early on, and what you continue to do today for those that are in the labor arena, particularly in California, but all around the country, is important. I'd love to hear your perspective. Have our voters and those viewing this right now understand how you see the part of the equation that we don't often hear about, that's also part of a more perfect union.
Well, one of the important things that we need to do right now is just get people to vote. And, it's interesting. We had Michael Moore on just before me, and I quote Michael Moore in his show on Broadway when he said, when we wake up in the morning, we wash our face, we brush our teeth, and then we call our congressman. Okay. And I have been quoting Michael in all of the Zoom events that I've been doing because that's exactly what we need. We need more participation at the grassroots level for people to get engaged, politically engaged, to make sure that we are electing the right people to Congress and to our school boards, et cetera, but also to stay on top of them to make sure that they vote the right way. As we know right now, what's happening in the U.S. Senate right now, we are also concerned because so much of what we need, the Build Back America Act, the John Lewis Voter Act, the PRO Act for labor unions, Equal Rights Amendment for women, and these are all things that are right now in the U.S. Senate, and we're all biting our nails right now to hoping that Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin get on board, and that they will vote for the Build Back Better America Act and all of these important laws that are pending right now. But I kind of want to follow up on your discussion with Michael more about Social Security. The census just showed that the Hispanics now we're the largest minority in the country, and here in the Central Valley of California, where I am at, Kevin McCarthy's district, by the way, that Hispanics are now the majority, and we find this also in Texas, where if not the majority, very close to the majority. And when we think about our Social Security system, the average age of the Anglo population is up in the 50s. And when we think of the average age of the Hispanic population, is probably in the teens or the early 20s. And maybe even less than that. And so when we think about who's going to be paying into the Social Security system, we have a lot of our Anglo population is aging out. It's got to be the people of the Hispanic population. But at the same time, we see that we are not having an equitable education for a lot of the Hispanic population. I think there's only 2% of all of the teachers in the United States that are bilingual, and we are not getting a quality and equitable education for the young Hispanic youth. Well, they're going to have good jobs and good careers so that they can pay more money into the Social Security system. And I think that just really shows how, as a nation, that we all have to depend on each other in order to be able to create this more perfect union that we're all talking about and that we want. And at the same time, when we look at you talked about the Department of Defense, but then we have to look at the prison population, the mass incarcerations that we have. And again, we can see that there are a large number, the majority of the people in our prison population are young men of color and young women of color. And so we can see where this imbalance is. And then we talk about our tax dollars here in the Central Valley of California. The fifth largest economy in the world, we have in the Central Valley 22 prisons that have been built, 22 prisons and only one university. And when we think about
Wow.
the critical stage that we are right now in our country, with everything that has happened, with the insurrection, George Floyd murder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that we know that we are coming to a reawakening and a reckoning of what's happened in the past, and that we have to do something to heal our nation. And the one way, sure way that we know that we can do this is through education. And yet we do not see the money coming into our educational systems. You know, our teachers are not being paid what they should be paid. They don't have the support systems of social workers and counselors and nurses, the things that they need to do a good job. And so I want to say education is going to be absolutely crucial to heal our nation. In California, they finally passed an ethnic studies bill so we can teach our kids the true history of the United States of America, so we can start erasing the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, all of these isms that we have in our country that we have to get rid of.
Right.
You know, the healing that needs to happen, and it's got to happen through education.
Dolores, I mean, I'm going to keep this tape that, you know, of our discussion forever, because you just kind of, you know, drew a line between a lot of dimensions of the social contract and what the future of America is. And the one I don't think you mentioned, but you actually did it last week, I think, was we have now the big UN climate change conference coming up, and you just hosted Jennifer Granholm, the Secretary of Energy, in a meeting with a lot of Dolores Huerta's followers and gatherers. And I'd just love to get your sense of the climate challenge and how you're also connecting, you know, the community that you've been advocating for to that question. And what's the bridge there?
Well, actually, that is going to be one of our major projects that we're going to be doing with the Dolores Huerta Foundation next year. We're teaming up with Danny Sheehan of the Romero Institute, and we're going to do a statewide project to try to pass a stronger legislation that we need. And hopefully our Governor Gavin Newsom will join us so that we can start making some major changes. And again, when we talk about the future, we have to think about all of these jobs. Like, yeah, I'm here in Bakersfield, California, which is a major producer of petroleum, but also the major producer of green jobs here in the state of California. But we know that we have to transition all of these oil jobs and coal jobs to green jobs. And they have to be jobs that are going to pay workers a living wage, not temporary jobs, but they need to be good jobs. And this is really important, not only, of course, that we have to save our planet, but also to make sure that all of those workers that are going to be displaced when we stop using oil and fossil fuels, that these workers can also be taken care of.
Dolores, I want to ask you a question about the past, because I'm always sort of interested, you know, when you have hindsights, and you were working with Cesar Chavez and organizing, you know, field workers and you know, the early days of the agricultural labor movement, unionizing and whatnot. I'm interested in, you know, any group that had this, and of course you succeeded in so many ways, but what did you get wrong that you corrected for later? What were some of the blind spots? Because I think blind spots matter. When you have activists and people coming on, you know, you have new tools. What are some of the mistakes of movements that might be good to learn from?
Well, it's kind of hard to think in terms. I don't think that the United Farm Workers made any mistakes. I think that we followed the rules, so to speak, not only in the way that we organize the workers through nonviolence, and also electing people to office that would support us, like Governor Jerry Brown. It's kind of hard to say this, but sometimes we trusted people that maybe betrayed us, and so a lot of the foundation that we had, again, through the political process, was taken away from us, and the farm workers to this day have never recovered. After we had a Republican governor that was elected, Governor Duke Manchin, and he pretty much dismantled a lot of the gains that we had made in terms of organizing. We had an invasion by the Teamsters Union in 1973, where we had over 100,000 farm workers under contract in California. But not only in California, we had farm workers in Texas, we had farm workers in Arizona, and in New Mexico under union contract. So again, the political process is, of course, we we always have to look at. Just exactly the same thing that we're talking about now, what's happening in our U.S. Senate right now with all of these bills like the Equal Rights Amendment and these others that are up there right now, waiting to see what's going to happen. So a lot of this comes down to the moment that we are in right now in our country, about having the political strength and the political base to make sure that the people that we elect, not only that we elect progressives, but we also make sure that we keep them in check and make them accountable.
Well, let me just ask you real quickly, one last quick one. You received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Obama. I watched that just last night, and it's very moving, the things he said. I'm just wondering if you think, I know you admire President Obama, but is he doing enough in this time of, he was responsible for, securing the deal in the Paris Climate Accords. But I mean, do you think he is out there enough touching these issues you care about at a key moment, as you just said? Do you think he needs to come out more, or do you think he's just doing it right and sitting back?
Well, I would like to see more of President Obama. I'm happy to see that he's going to be campaigning for Terry McAuliffe, the gubernatorial candidate in Virginia. And I think that yes, his voice is sorely needed. I think Michelle Obama's voice is also sorely needed. Yes, we can't have them retire. I don't think Hillary should retire. I think her voice is also very sorely needed right now, because we are at this point in our country right now where we have so much division and I'm going to use the word ignorance. There's so much ignorance that a lot of the hate that is being perpetrated comes from people's lack of being enlightened and informed. And so, yes, we have a lot of work to do right now just to save our democracy. And we do need these leaders to come forward.
Listen, I just want to say thank you to Dolores Huerta, who is a legendary social and civic activist, labor organizer, president, and founder of the Dolores Huerta Foundation. As always, we really appreciate your time and sharing your perspective with us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Joining me now is David Rubenstein, co-founder and co-chair of the Carlyle Group, one of the world's largest private investment firms. But he's also the author of a great new book. I love this book, The American Experiment, Dialogues on a Dream, where he explores the American spirit through conversations with notable figures like Madeleine Albright, Ken Burns, and many others. David, it's great to see you as always. I love your interviews. I know you were interviewing Senator Joe Manchin this morning, just like I was doing a little while ago. We put him live because he was on the phone with President Biden, and he couldn't make the slot, so we kind of brought him in. So I'll have to compare our conversations. But let me just ask you, you've been talking to the most fascinating, personalities in this country. And I think as we're in this theme of a more perfect union and shaping it from this day looking forward, how do we get it right? What's the struggle got to look like? This is not a kumbaya game. I'm just, from your insights of talking to people, what does this nation need to get most right to keep America right?
Of course, if I had known how to do this and get a more perfect union, I would have gone to Iowa and New Hampshire and made it more clear what my views were. It is not easy. What I tried to say in my book is that what we had was an effort to create a new type of democracy, a representative democracy that really hadn't been done before. And it was an experiment. And it was an experiment that Thomas Jefferson didn't think would last more than 20 years. And many of the founding fathers would be astounded if they came back today and realized we're still using the same Constitution that we had almost 250 years ago. The principal problem in the Constitution probably was that there was a defect in the Constitution, which was the slavery. We put slavery in. We didn't specifically mention the word slavery, but it was allowed. And in effect, that led to the Civil War and the greatest stress test this country's ever had. Since that time, we've had other stress tests, of course, World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, Watergate, 9/11, and Black Lives Matter, a whole variety of situations relating to that, the civil rights movement. Most recently, we had the events of January the 6th, which produced us a real stress test as well. So we're evolving this democracy, but it still is evolving, and it's not easy. Right now, I think the country is in not great shape because we are at bitter division with each other. You can't get anything done through the government, really, because the Congress is really bitterly divided. So the only thing they can do is just pass debt limits to keep us alive and appropriation bills to keep the government going. But anything of consequence, like a Voting Rights Act, isn't going to get through anymore.
Well, as you do, I read a lot of history, and I sort of been asking myself the question that, in terms of not the history we've lived, but before looking back at other period of times, that period after Lincoln's assassination, Andrew Johnson, the period that came after. To me, that's one of the periods that feels very much like what we're in right now, with a lot of the divides. But I'm interested in your knowledge of history, which is so has so much tactile. You have a tactile understanding of other moments in American history that we got through. And whether you have in this kind of moment of dark, toxic times now, a model that gives you hope about where we might be going.
Well, the United States has always survived these stress tests, and I suspect we will again. But right now, you have a situation where bipartisan legislation is very difficult to get through the Congress, and ultimately, you've got the country pretty much bitterly divided between certain factions, certain parts of the Republican Party and certain parts of the Democratic Party are just not even on the same wavelength. When I worked on Capitol Hill in the 70s, you had people working in bipartisan legislation. Now, people who are older like me always say there were the good old times before. It wasn't so great when we were living through it. Perhaps we had challenges in the 70s as well. But at least people were willing to talk together. Right now, members of Congress aren't really socializing, talking together. Joe Manchin said today, when I was interviewing, that basically members of Congress on the opposite parties are never socializing really much anymore, and they don't really talk to each other. And as a result, you have what you have in Congress, which is everything waits until the last minute. So it's not a great way to run a government, not a great way to kind of give people who are younger people a sense that we really know where this country's going.
I just want to read for our audience some of the things you've done with your philanthropy. We call it patriotic philanthropy that matter. You've paid for the restoration and repair of the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, Monticello, Montpelier, Mount Vernon, Arlington House, Iwo Jima Memorial, and it goes on and on. Your contributions to these iconic symbols and places that reserve. You had rare copies of the Magna Carta, which I saw thanks to you, the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, Bill of Rights, and others that you've done. And so I'm interested. I'm interested in what if you hadn't been there? What would have happened to all of this? Would we have cared? But the second question I have is, your knowledge of this. If you had an hour with any of these founding fathers or any great leaders in America that were no longer with us, who would David Rubenstein want to spend that hour with?
Well, he wasn't a founding father, but the most impressive American, in my view, was Abraham Lincoln, who held the country together. But of the founding fathers, obviously George Washington was the person who presided over the Constitutional Convention, helped win the Revolutionary War, and was our first president. I interviewed a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours the other day, Walter Isaacson, and he's written about many great people. When I asked him who he would like to have dinner with of all the people he actually written about, and he said Benjamin Franklin, because he thought he was really a true genius and really was an intellect that would make anybody interested in having dinner with him. To me, the founding fathers had their warts for sure, and we're debating today whether or not we should honor them because some of them were slave owners. My own view is that when you have slave owners, if their principal thing in life is that they're a slave owner and that's what they're famous for and that's what they most cared about, that's not somebody that probably deserves a monument or memorial. But if they were first president of the United States and also a slave owner, we should tell people the truth of what they did that we don't think is appropriate, but we should also let people know about the good things that they did. I've done these things because I'm trying to remind people of American history, because the theory I have is that if people learn more about American history, we'll have a more informed democracy and a better democracy. So it's a modest way to kind of do this, and I'm trying to do this in a way where other people will try to do it as well, because I'm just one person.
I think one other element that's sort of interesting to sort of think about, our history in this sort of moment is to think about leaders. I once, when I worked in the Senate in the 1990s, I had met Senator Strom Thurmond, and I asked him, what did he most regret? And he regretted his position in voting against the Civil Rights Act and his connection to essentially a Southern class of politicians that were opposed to civil rights. And he was actually, for Strom Thurmond in that moment, very, very emphatic and sincere about it. So he saw that he had been on the wrong side of history. And I'm just interested in your conversations with people like Senator Manchin, who has carved out a voting rights bill, but he tells me he's not ready, not there at all to kind of do a carve out in the filibuster. Whether on something like that, where there's something, in the vice, whether or not you think in the long run someone like Joe Manchin will be seen as on the wrong side of history or on the right side of history, who saved the country from the back and forth that would come back, if you got rid of the filibuster. Every time a new power came in, you'd, reverse everything, essentially, is his argument.
Well, that's his argument. And remember, it is expected by many people in the city in which we live that the Republicans will gain control of the House and the Senate next election. That may be true, maybe not. But if they do, and the filibuster is gone, all those who want to get rid of the filibuster now may regret it. So as we learned with federal judges, when they got rid of the filibuster for the Supreme Court justices, in effect, those people who wanted to get rid of it at one point later regretted it. So it's not easy to say. I would say Senator Manchin is not going to change his position on it, and I don't think the filibuster is going to go away anytime soon.
Well, I want to thank David Rubenstein, co-founder, co-chair of the Carlyle Group, one of the great patriotic philanthropists of this country, and author of a great new book, The American Experiment, Dialogues and a Dream. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Steve.
My next guest is the first Native American cabinet secretary in U.S. history. She's a member of the Pueblo of Laguna and a 35th generation New Mexican. Secretary Haaland, it's great to see you. Last time I talked to you, you were Representative Haaland, and like 3 days later, you're nominated. So it's great to see you with your new nomenclature. So I got to start out fun. I mean, sorry, folks, this is fun. It's not all serious, but I mean, this is serious. You ran the Boston Marathon.
I did.
Yeah, tell us how it went, what you did, why you did it, what it meant to you.
So first of all, I will describe the Boston Marathon with one word. It was joyful. The people who come out to watch the marathon, the spectators, were so amazing, and it's just grateful. I felt like they were powering me the entire way. This year, because of the pandemic, they postponed the marathon. It's usually in April. This time it was on Indigenous Peoples Day. I had an opportunity to speak at a reception for Patty Dillon, a Native American power runner who placed second in the Boston Marathon, 79, 80, and 81. And so I was happy to run the marathon on Indigenous Peoples Day, and the people of Boston were so incredibly welcoming. It was a really great time. And I reached my goal. I wanted to do it in under 5 hours, and I accomplished that.
Well, that's terrific. Well, Madam Secretary, I want to ask you a broad question, because I think many Americans are less familiar with the Department of the Interior and what it's responsible for. It's the first Native American in this role, and you have sort of large purview over, a lot of different arenas of what happens in the interior, the public lands in this country. But I just love our audience to know, as you look at your dashboard each day, what are you trying to deliver? What are your goals, in your job?
Right. Well, I have more than two parts, but two general parts. One is to essentially manage and conserve our public lands, waters, cultural heritage for the people of the United States, and also to ensure that the federal government is living up to its trust and treaty obligations to Indian tribes. So that takes, we have over 65,000 or close to 65,000 career staff here at the department. We manage millions of acres of public lands. We feel very confident that we're in a new era. With Indian country, particularly, President Biden has directed us to have an all-of-government approach. Every cabinet secretary is ensuring that we're all living up to those trust and treaty obligations. Tribal consultation is a priority for all of us, and I feel very honored and humble to be in this role and to serve the American people and have President Biden as our leader.
Let me ask you this other question. I used to work for Jeff Bingaman in New Mexico in the 90s, and so I know the state well. And so I think this is true of many states, is that, when I hear the word climate refugees, about those that you see the changing climate, I feel like we have climate refugees and climate victims in America. We have COVID, stranded victims. COVID has made such an impact and had such a disproportionate impact on certain communities in this country. We have inequality. We have lack of broadband access. We have lack of, even health care provision. I just want to ask you, and I know it's an unfair question, but as I think about New Mexico, or as I think about many other states that also have Native American populations, but it's really beyond that. What are some of the playbook, ways of thinking about rewiring how we reach people where they are so that they feel like they are included in the magic of America. When we think about a more perfect union, that we're not leaving people behind. And I just want to ask you seriously, because I know it's not a casual question. How do we make right so much that we've been getting wrong when it comes to forgetting and neglecting a significant portion of our own population?
Thank you for that question. And look, one of the most important things I think we can do is to essentially center the voices of those folks who have felt unseen and underrepresented for decades and decades. And that means that we have a workforce that looks like America. We need folks from all those communities who have felt underrepresented to work here, to work in the Department of the Interior and other departments, to work on the issues that matter to those folks, to understand what it means to feel left behind, to be at the receiving end of federal policies. And that's one of the reasons why we have, for example, started our missing and murdered unit to make sure that we are working to address that issue, missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, and why we launched our federal boarding school policy, federal Indian boarding school initiative, excuse me. It is so important to have the folks, those people, to hear their voices and have their work guiding, the work that we're doing to make sure that nobody gets left behind.
I have to ask you, what's your favorite park?
Whatever park I'm sitting in is my favorite park, honestly. And, from my office, I can look out the window and see the National Mall. That is an amazing place for folks who live here in D.C. But we have national parks all over the country, and the career staff, they care deeply about our environment. They are there to make sure that families who might only have an opportunity for one vacation every once in a while, that they feel special and that they can enjoy themselves while in those amazing places.
Well, Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, we really appreciate the time. You're always so good to us to give us some time to give us your thoughts on these issues. And I felt it important, in this 3-day festival of ideas and politics and people, that we make sure we reach you. So thank you so much for your time and joining us today.
I appreciate the invitation.
My last guest of the hour is a key administration official who has the ear of President Joe Biden, like all the time. Ron Klain is the White House Chief of Staff, and I had the chance to speak with him a short while ago about what a more perfect union means to the Biden administration. Here's what he had to say.
Ron, thank you so much for joining us today. Listen, when President Biden launched his political campaign, in part, it was at a very dark moment in American history. It was the Charlottesville moment, and he said, we have to fight for the soul of the nation. January 6th was another moment where it felt clear that this fight for the soul of the nation was underway. As we talk today about a more perfect union and what it takes to make that a more perfect union, I just be interested in your reflection after being in the White House. How are we doing on that cause of how President Biden shaped it of fighting for the soul of the nation?
Well, look, I think it's something he thinks about every day as president. What can he do to pull this country together, to move this country forward, to try to heal the divisions that we have? And I think we've made some progress in that regard. And, I think in terms of where we were as a country when he became president, we had 4,000 people a day dying from COVID. We had no job creation in America. We had just a country kind of badly divided over what the path forward is. And I think we've made a lot of progress on that. We obviously went and vaccinated over 200 million Americans. We've, made progress in terms of job creation. We've made progress in terms of moving the country forward. And in terms of the legislative front, we were able to put together a bipartisan infrastructure plan, bring Democrats, Republicans together on the most significant piece of legislation in decades in that regard, made progress on bipartisan innovation legislation, so-called CHIPS Act and innovation legislation. So we still have a long way to go. There's no question it's still a country that's divided. There's no question there's still a lot of cleavages in this country. Look at issues like voting rights and immigration. You see those divisions. But I think we didn't get in this mess overnight, Steve. This wasn't just something that happened recently. These are long-standing divisions in our country. It's going to take time to heal them and bring the country together. But that's something that the president's very, very focused on.
You talked about COVID and the infrastructure bill, and there are little divides in all of these areas. But when you look at what this nation came through and still is going through, I kind of remind people we're not through the pandemic. It's still underway. There's still people suffering. But there's sort of a tale of two nations going on right now. And one thing is clear: when I talk to all sides of this corner, when I go down and talk to those people that are against wearing masks, those that are for them, and everywhere in between, there is a kind of palpable lack of trust in institutions, lack of palpable trust in politicians and governors, and even in science. I sort of feel like we're on the edge of so many scientific revolutions in this country, but if Galileo were alive, he'd still be found guilty. I'm interested in how you folks think about institutions, and what's going to be the secret sauce you think you can bring to bear to restore trust in institutions?
Well, first of all, Steve, I have to push back against the premise a little bit here, which is there isn't 100% support for mask wearing or 100% support for vaccinations or some of the things you mentioned, but there is overwhelming support. So, more than 70% of the country is fully vaccinated. Virtually 80% of adults have had at least one shot. 95% of seniors have had one vaccination. Mask mandates have overwhelming public support. Not unanimous support. I agree. There are definitely people against all these things, but the country is united. It is united, not unanimous, but united with overwhelming support for science-based measures to fight COVID, as you said. And so I think that we have to remember this is a big country. There are always going to be some dissenting voices. It's the way it should be, I suppose. I mean, it should be that way, absolutely. But my point being that those dissenting voices can't drown out the overwhelming majority support for the kind of measures you're talking about. So I think sometimes we see if something's a 70-30 issue, that's a lot of unity in a big country around the steps we're taking on COVID. So that's the first thing I'd say in response to that. Now, look, I do think that we do have a lot of challenges still to tackle on COVID, on the economy, on these other issues you're talking about. But I do think we are finding the president's economic agenda. Most of the polls have 65, 70% support. This is a very much a strong consensus agenda that is uniting the country. Again, not unanimous, but uniting the country behind these measures we need to take.
Well, let me ask you just to break down. When the president came in, he said there were some big principles that you were about: climate, equity, inequality, solving these challenges and problems as part of the way of bringing the nation together. We're right before the Glasgow UN climate change talks. We've got battles going on over the reconciliation bill, over the infrastructure bill that's attached to it, and other kinds of things. I'm just sort of interested as you kind of look at it. You're famous, Ron, for being the guy during debate prep talks to always come up with the angle that wasn't thought of, the critique no one thought. If you were to be that guy for your own administration, looking at the agenda and saying, hey, we haven't done this, this is not where we've gone, things haven't gone right, what would be some of your areas of concern, even about your own administration, in delivering on these very principled planks that you laid out at the beginning?
Well, look, I think we've made a lot of progress, and we have a lot of action on the board right now. And I'd say the thing we need to do is deliver on the proposals that are pending. Look, we have a proposal in the reconciliation bill, in the Build Back Better bill, to make a historic investment in climate change, more than $500 billion over 10 years. Just to put that in perspective, the entire Department of Energy over the next 10 years is going to spend $450 billion. We're talking about an investment in climate change larger than the entire Department of Energy. We just now have to go get that done. I think we're making a lot of progress in that regard. I think on the issues of race, we definitely need to deliver on voting rights, on criminal justice reform. But again, we've made a lot of progress on some of the economic issues of opportunity. The Black unemployment rate is down below 8% again. We've made progress in terms of creating jobs. We made progress in terms of investing in historically disadvantaged farmers, for example, big proposal in the rescue plan that the president got done. So, we're making progress on this agenda. It all obviously isn't all done. We're 9 months into the president's term, but we, I think, have put solid proposals on the board. I think we're very close to getting some very big ones passed. We just need to keep up with the work.
You know, another part of this question about how do you restore, I guess, quality and solvency to American democracy is to look at the just huge increase in misinformation and disinformation and those platforms, you know, where I won't say that have allowed it necessarily, because that'll be litigated, but where it has definitely happened. And you just see, you know, conspiracy theories driving at least the aperture of some folks out there. And I'd just be interested, you know, particularly with COVID, but there's a lot more than that, where America seems uniquely vulnerable because of the openness on information and freedom of expression. I'm just wondering how you think we can get to a place where social media platforms, where the big new tech companies, you know, feel a responsibility, a national responsibility to getting this right.
Well, I think it's a great question. And I agree, COVID is front and center in that conversation, but not the only thing by far. There are all kinds of issues where they get blown up on social media. Misinformation, disinformation further serves to divide us and push us apart. Look, I think the president's been outspoken on this. He's called for changes to Section 230, for example. He's called for other kinds of legislative action. He's appointed very tough enforcers, like the new chair of the FTC, for example, to look at the kind of economic lineup of social media and how these entities are regulated, competition issues, for example, to try to make sure that the playing field is fair and that the kind of the size and bulk of these entities isn't exploited for anti-competitive purposes. But this is a giant challenge that we face, that democracies all around the world face. This challenge of the rapid spread of disinformation, misinformation in very open societies. I think this is just one of the great challenges we face in our democracy and democracies around the world as we head into this next decade. And I think you know, we've got some answers on the table here, but this is a very, very important conversation.
I just finally ask, Ron, you know, one of the things of this president is his, I don't know whether they call it tolerance, but his willingness to hear all sides from within his own party. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. President Trump clobbered those folks in his party who weren't, you know, aligned with him, and often ran them out of the party, you know, basically, you know, ran people against them. President Biden is not doing that. But I'm just wondering, at the end of the day, when you have such divides like with with Senator Manchin, Bernie Sanders, and others in different wings that are bringing different perspectives under the tent of the Democratic Party, I'm interested in how you resolve it, because we're all watching it. Everyone's intrigued. But at the end of the day, we don't know how it will come out. But do you sense that everyone is of goodwill, that they understand that there's a kind of civitas, that they all eventually have to agree on something? I'd just love to get your take on how you approach it, because it's so very different than what we saw in the last 4 years.
Yeah, I think there's a legislative dimension to it and a broader dimension to it. The legislative dimension, the math is obvious. We have 50 Democratic senators. If they don't all agree, we can't pass anything. So you have to get both Joe Manchin and Bernie Sanders' vote on a bill to be able to have a chance of passing that bill. That's just the math. In the House, we have a little more of a margin, but not much more of a margin in a body that large. So again, from a legislative perspective, you have to bring the party together to advance legislation. But I think the president thinks about it more broadly than that. It is important for Democrats to be united, to take on the challenges we're seeing around the country, challenges to things like voting rights, challenges to even the basic elements of democracy that we're seeing. And we need to pull a party together to take that on, to have the kind of broad support. And frankly, not just our party, but get Republicans who are willing to join us in an effort to protect this democracy from the kinds of threats to democracy we're seeing all around the country. And that could only happen in unifying people, the kind of unity the president brought to the campaign in 2020, 81 million voters, more voters than had voted for any candidate for any office in this country in the history of this country. And that's the kind of majority you need to stave off the threats to democracy, stave off the threats to this country moving forward. We're going to have to continue to deliver on that here in the Biden White House and here in the things he's doing around the country.
Just real finally, this is real funny. You're a prodigious Twitter. You're the Twitter. You're the the tweeter in chief of this administration, as far as I'm concerned. Does the president read your tweets? Does he have fun with your tweets? Does he ever comment on them?
The president, I talk about a lot of things. Twitter is not one of them. He is trying to fight COVID, help the economy, deal with racism, fight climate change. I don't think my Twitter feed is one of his concerns.
Well, I enjoy it. I want to say thank you to Ron Klain, White House Chief of Staff. He's been Chief of Staff for so many folks out there, it's hard to count. But Ron Klain, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Well, that brings us to the end of our program today. Wow, what a lineup! I'm so thrilled to be with all of you and have these opportunities to ask questions in part on your behalf. So a big thank you to Microsoft and to Southern Company for their support, and to all of you attendees. For anybody who missed these conversations, they're going to be up on our website right away. So share them, watch them, enjoy them. I think it's a fascinating set of lessons in American politics, American history, and American policy. So make sure to join us tomorrow morning starting at 11:30 a.m. Eastern for day 2 of A More Perfect Union. We're going to be talking about space, the economy, and much more. Our headliners session will feature Khan Academy's Sal Khan, Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, and many others. Until then, I'm Steve Clemens. Be well.